Good morning. I get the honor of being one of the first sessions, and my name is Mark Zorn. I am an independent security consultant for the media and entertainment industry, and I do a lot of content security for the various studios and post-production houses and such. And I've been doing this particular track for a couple of years now, so I like to think I know what I'm doing. We have experienced as an industry some key losses in the last few years as we've moved from film to digital. And what we need to do is change the attitude a little bit from being centered around an audit model where people come in and force you to adhere to certain best practices, to actually putting in some of the technology that will enable us to create the content safely, as well as protect it once it's gone out into the world. Today we have three different papers to talk about some of those technologies. We're going to start off talking about blockchain, and I don't know how many people, just a quick show of hands, are people familiar with blockchain as a technology? Oh, good. That's actually more than I was expecting. And then we'll talk about maintaining your digital assets in the cloud. And then we will talk about streaming security and keeping the streaming content secure all the way down to the customer. Our first paper, as I just mentioned, is about blockchain. I have the honor of introducing Steve Wong, who works for DXC, and he is very familiar with the topic and is going to show you how we can use blockchain to the advantage of our process creating content. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Steve Wong.
I've got a lav and I've got that mic, so I'm not sure which one we're going to do. But anyways, thanks for coming out today. Just quickly, this is not a marketing thing, it's a clarification. DXC Technology is actually Hewlett-Packard Enterprise that merged with Computer Services Corporation to form DXC Technologies. So same cell phone, same email address. It's just a new thing, so we launched the stock that way. Anyways, this is an interesting thing. How many folks went to the earlier talk, the opening talk this morning? Oh, impressive. So we're going to link together some of the points that he said with what blockchain is. And thanks, Mark, asking who knew about blockchain, because that's actually my first question. But thanks. So it was really interesting the number of folks that raised their hand, because when I had this talk about this subject about a year ago, I probably got like 5 or 2% of the audience. So I know there's been a lot of press about blockchain and everything else. But today, it's really to encourage more thought and thought leadership about what blockchain is and how we can use it in Hollywood in making making movies and making television programs. And I think the speaker brought a really good point up that today it's really about intellectual property throughout the entire process. And the challenge that we have in Hollywood is when you make a piece of content. For fun, I write feature film scripts to keep creative. The challenge is, through that entire process, how do we keep track of everything? After you make a movie, how do you keep track of all the assets? The way I look at blockchain is sort of being able to link everything together. And the reason I'm here in the security session is we look at blockchain as the key of securing all of that. So the goal of today's meeting is really to open your minds and think of applications, think about your daily workflow and the things that you do in your business and how it can tie together. So, I'll get into this here. So this is really an interesting thing. So we've got a lot to talk about in 25 minutes and 26 seconds. So really the goal is just to put it together, some thought leadership in this room. And my goal is to talk to Howard and to get a SMPTE panel together to have standards for blockchain for motion picture and television industry. So when you take a look at basically what blockchain is, it's an interesting thing that Mark Andreessen, who's one of our board members, talks about. So really it's a transfer of a piece of digital property to one another in a safe and secure manner. So if we look at that as the thesis of blockchain, I think you'll get some of the things we'll talk about today. So we're going to briefly talk about what is blockchain, how does blockchain work, the evolution of blockchain, the blockchain business benefits. We all work for companies and everyone asks us why are we doing this, so you have to know the business benefits. Implementation considerations. There's a number of ways to do blockchain. So again, when we think about our business and what we do in technology, you have to think about how that works. And really specifically here, how we could use it in Hollywood. Folks have talked about blockchain. Mostly we hear of it in Bitcoin. We hear it, my financial clients really have been playing with this. But I think this is a great forum to think of how we can use it here in Hollywood. So what is blockchain? It really has two key parts to it. So if you remember your accounting class in college, basically it's a ledger transaction. So basically we're recording a transaction in a ledger, just like you would in a book. The second key part of this is a peer-to-peer network of these ledgers. So sort of looks like that. So, why are we here today? I mean, it started out with cryptocurrencies and things like that. But a number of models have changed. Again, my company deals with the Fortune 100 companies, and we see things changing dramatically over the last year and the next few years about this. One of the key things is right now is if you went to the store and you bought something with your credit card, everything is a central transaction validation. You can't do anything without a bank. You can't buy or sell anything without a bank, generally. So the difference is in this distributed transaction validation that starts out, instead of one group or one individual is saying, yes, this is valid, with blockchain, we have this distributed transaction validation, where a number of individuals or computers validate that transaction is correct. So that's the big difference. And the world is changing towards this. As we go to IoT devices, you have millions, if not billions, of devices out there soon that will have all these transactions. So envision a world where you have a Coke machine that is at the point that needs to be restocked. Something of a blockchain transaction can send a message as an IoT device to a supplier to refill that without any human interaction. So again, start thinking of these things in the terms of how we make stories here. So quick basic technologies. Again, peer-to-peer networking is one of the basics. The other part of it is a crypto hashtag function. And we'll get to this in more detail. And the other side of that is a key. The buyer and seller in that transaction has a private key and a public key to validate that. So again, the basic technology, I want you to think of the Merkle tree almost like MPEG theories. So basically, you take a look at that root of that hash, that A and B, that's a derivative of information of everything that's underneath that. So you can see in the leaf of A, it's a hash of C and D, which has all that derivative information. So the thing of this Merkle tree is we retain that root. Again, sort of like MPEG, we don't send all that information, we send that root information. So again, how does it work? And I'm going to jump to a few different pieces of the blockchain, then I bring it back to how we use it in Hollywood. So, and if you have any questions afterwards, please reach out to me. So again, this is the basis of the transaction. Okay, so you have block header 1, think of it as a seller of a thing or a transfer of a file. Then it moves to block header 2, the receiver of that. So block header 2 now picks up information from the previous block header and puts it, into that block, tied to the Merkle root. Okay, again, we'll make this a little bit more clear. So where's blockchain right now? If we take a look at the evolution of the internet, it's almost been 50 years when DARPA started this little project out back in 1969 to where we are today to IoT devices. Blockchain has really come to where we are today within 7 years. So it's really accelerating quickly. I know the VCs talk a lot about blockchain and everything else, but what we're seeing is in other industries, they're really finding uses. For instance, the Navy, one of our clients, is using blockchain to keep track of their 3D printers. We're doing another project with DARPA where they're using blockchain for messaging, believe it or not. So there's a number of applications that are coming to work right now. Our banking clients are playing with this. to look at transactions, not just cryptocurrency, but basically how to do transactions. So this is an interesting thing. When you look at the hyper cycle of emerging technologies, blockchain is right at the top of that, where we call the peak of expectations. Okay, so now it's been around for 7 years. If you look at that chart in the bottom, there's some other technologies that have been around for less time, like gaming tokens, that are at the slope of enlightenment, which sounds like a pretty cool place to be. But the interesting thing, there are technologies that have been around for 10 years that are still at the innovation trigger point. So I think blockchain's really at an interesting point right now, where in the next few years, it's really going to accelerate greatly. For a number of reasons. One, for the security aspect of it, but also just for the ability of blockchain to keep track of the expansion of how IoT devices are being used in multiple transactions also. So again, this is a reason for the expansion of this. Again, assurance is decentralized. You have a reliable database, which inherently makes it secure. Amplification, this is an important thing. As devices start to explode and we try to tie our IP back to things, we need something that can do amplification, that can keep track of all these transactions. And serenity, or security, both come together. The technology behind blockchain is just built for this serenity or security involved, just based on being transparent. Efficiencies, again, as we have millions of devices out there, millions of consumers, we want information about this. We need some way to keep track of it. You know, just an Excel file with someone in accounting keeping track of all your IP is not going to cut it anymore. We need something that can expand greatly and that can be done very efficiently. And this is the most interesting thing to me anyways, is the business intelligence part. You know, at the opening session, we talked about the enormous amount of information out there today. We looked at Netflix having 76 genres for movies, and they know everything about how they consume. Blockchain is an interesting way to keep all this information into a form where everyone along that transaction path can see instantly the information of who watched the movie, what they watched about it, and everyone along that path can get this information instantly, and it's transparent. So again, I want you to think of blockchain as applications. And through your daily work and lives, just think of how you could have an application be tied to blockchain. Because I think that's where the opportunity is. And we've got enough smart brains in this room that can really tie this together and maybe start new companies or new applications. So when we take a look at Bitcoin, and most of the folks have heard of Bitcoin in the room, right? The new currency that's or not new currency, but a currency that is really exploding. We look at that as the first application of what this blockchain can be. You know, smart contracts. Blockchain is about a transaction, so smart contracts between a buyer and a seller, or a transfer of a file from a sender and a receiver. Again, proof of existence. You know, I had a conversation with some of the folks at Universal last week, and they said the biggest challenge that they have with IP is who has the latest right of it, who has the proof of the existence that they have the right to sell that content. You know, blockchain can help solve that sort of thing. Decentralized IoT that's blowing up, again, blockchain's a good place to do that, and the number of other applications is yet to be developed by you. So when you look at blockchains and how you can apply it to your daily lives, there are a few considerations you have to look at. Permissionless and permissioned blockchains. So most of the studios that I've talked around town, their thought is to have a permissioned blockchain. In other words, we have the 6, we determine who is judging the IP, if it's true or not, and if it should come into the chain. Permissionless blockchain is more like cryptocurrency, where you have consumers all over the world who may not be related say, yes, this is a valid transaction, that's not a valid transaction, or file transfer. And we look at 2 different parts of it. The permission is more on the business side. So the production of the movie or television program, the commercialization of it. And the other side is the unpermissioned, which is more, sounds like they're having fun. Is more unpermissioned. So the social part of it, the consumers exchanging information, the public. So that would be more on the unpermissioned side. when you look at blockchain, it's not just one chain, there's multiple chains going on with this that's tied to this unique IP. So, believe it or not, blockchain theory started off back in 1453 AD in May with armies. And I want you to think of blockchain like this. So at this date, in Constantinople, the last realm of the Roman Empire, they were surrounded. They're about to be slaughtered. So the only way to survive for these generals was to do something exactly at the same time. They'd either attack at the same time or retreat at the same time or get slaughtered. The other thing that they had is messaging between the generals. The problem at this time, all the generals were not loyal. Some of the generals were going to basically, go to the other side. So think of that like blockchain, right? So what happens based on the technology of blockchain is when you have two messages or two transactions, everyone has to agree that yes, this is a valid transaction. Then the transaction happens. Or no, it's not a valid transaction. It doesn't happen. If you have disagreement, you abandon the transaction. So that's a basic overlying principle based on what these generals did back in 1453 that comes to how we do blockchain nowadays. So again, centralized and decentralized using the same basic theory. We all agree on it, we disagree on it. If we can't agree, we abandon the transaction or file transfer. So again, how do we do all this in Hollywood? Again, I want you to think of this, or I like to think of this as a process of making a product. From the script all the way to the consumer and everything in between, blockchain would tie together each one of those either transactions or hands-off of those files or those versionings. So again, I call it the Hollywood hustle. So imagine you come up with a great idea, you want to write a script. The way I view this as the first part of the block is you register your copyright, you get a number. That's your first block, okay? The IP exists, now I have this, now I want to send it to my agent, say. So again, say I use it, again, if Adobe did this, I have it a PDF, I send that to my agent, they open it up, we know their MAC address, we know the time they read it, that's the second part of it. They sell the script. Second part of that transaction, this gets recorded in the block. It goes over to the producer, now they're going into production. Every part of that production ties to this blockchain ID. And again, at production, that camera file is tied to this particular ID. It moves to the DIT station. Again, that's another transaction as we use it. It gets logged into this, all the way to distribution to someone watching it on Netflix or whichever way that anytime that person views that particular file, it gets tagged to that ID and goes all the way back, and everyone sees it along the way, when this thing was seen and what metadata is in that particular file. So they want to stop on a frame and say, I like that pair of shoes. This would be able to tie back to that metadata to say, okay, this is where this resides. So again, specifically, I'm going to drop down through these two layers. So again, I write a script, I have a public key, I send it over to my agent, Alice. To open that file, she needs a key also. She opens it, boom, recorded to blockchain. Second part, we're shooting it. Dave gets that raw camera file from his DIT station, sends it over to the editor, Kim. That raw camera file has this encrypted with a key. As soon as that key is opened by the editor, again, that's recorded, part of the blockchain. Third part of this, my XYZ flicks or Netflix or whichever flicks you may have. I want to send that to my viewer. Again, I encrypt it. On the other side, Tom, the viewer, decrypts that. Goes to the blockchain. Now, I'm not saying any of this technology exists today. I'm just putting it out there of ways to think about this and how this can make your lives simpler. So again, that's another way to take a look at this. You have a smart contract between all the people in production. Writer makes a deal with the director. You bring in a producer. The talent has an agreement, with the unions, an investor, and everyone needs to know or has the ability to know about being in this contract. So they make contribution to whatever this contract is. They get evidence back that they're involved with this. Everyone, again, we can structure this any way they want. Typically, everyone can vote. Yes, they're all a part of this. Think of IMDb. You submit a project to IMDb, and they say, I'm involved with this movie. They sort of have to vote on you doing this. this is sort of thinking that sort of way, but in a way that is guaranteed by a number of folks. We go to production, the same thing, order to pay there, produce, someone views it, consumer pays for it or views it, whichever way, and it goes all the way back in this particular. Again, it doesn't have to be cryptocurrency. I view this as a ledger and way of keeping track of things. But the interesting thing, say it almost brings together a new way of making movies where people will feel more trust in saying, you know what, instead of paying me up front, I'll take a bigger percentage of the back end. This is a way where everyone can see it was actually watched, and yeah, I should get my residuals on this, and this is a way of tracking it. Again, I was talking about, instead of just having one blockchain, to really think of this in a number of different ways. So again, the big 6 studios may choose to have a private blockchain. They may have a number of folks that want to be involved with this. So you have a governance board. Say it's the MPAA that says, okay, I'm going to determine, out of the 6, who comes in, who comes out, and how we do the keys and everything else with this. You may have another side chain that audits everything, a Deloitte or Price Waterhouse or someone else. You may have another chain on this, which is more of a public chain. This is on the distribution side. This would be maybe an iTunes or PayPal and other folks like that. And you may have a third side chain, which will go with the production. You may have BMI, that's tracking the rights of the music involved with this IP. Or you may have entertainment partners or cast and crew that's keeping track of all the talent that's involved with this and the other residuals that need to be paid out, or the taxes, the tax credits that come in. Blockchain is a really nice place to put all this. Now, some folks may say, well, I can do a lot of that with Excel. It's probably true, you probably can. But the really goal of this is it's a distributed network where everyone that's part of this ecosystem can see it immediately. So again, a high-level diagram on this, and if anyone has questions, you can reach out to me. On-chain, you have an agency nodes that are tied to this, and then off-chain, you more have the data lake sort of layer that you can pull this information from, microservices and things like that that are tied to the users and third parties and things like that. So the way we look at blockchain, it really has 3 parts to it. It has the people, the software, and the hardware. And again, the hardware doesn't have to be your data centers. It could be Amazon or Azure or something else like that. In fact, Azure offers a blockchain as a service. Amazon offers a number of applications that are blockchain focused at this point. So the first part, basically, you have the nodes, as a service, platforms as a service that are out there, places to store all these databases. So the other part is a real important part, is the community, the people that you've chosen to have in this blockchain, the smart contracts that exist there, the developers for this, and the interfaces. And the other key part is, again, this platform, the platform these core developers that use. And again, this is the reason that I'm here to push for having SMPTE standards for blockchain. So that's it. I know I did a lot, in a few minutes, but I wanted to open it up and encourage folks to join our push for blockchain. I think it has some applications here in Hollywood. If you have any questions, there's my contacts, and reach out to me. Thanks so much.
Does anybody want to ask any questions now? We have a few minutes before. Go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. So, question, just the Bitcoin analogy here. Because there's a proof of work concept in Bitcoin, and it uses right now, 5,000 times more energy than, say, a Visa transaction does, and in 2020, it'll use all the energy that Denmark uses in a year. What is the parallel here is there a problem here with regard to this sort of exponential increase in difficulty because in the Bitcoin world compared to what you're proposing?
I think the challenge is, all the applications that you can use to this. I mean, the goal is to tie this to a specific point of IP and everything that tracks that IP. So if you take a look at a typical, movie that has merchandising and everything else, and you have other devices that are looking at this, there's millions and millions of points that are trying to get access to this IP information, which is a little bit different than a Bitcoin transaction, because that's the Bitcoin based on blockchain is more of a a currency transaction? Do you have the rights to do this, yes or no? So I sort of put this the other way around, where that's looking at a lot of different things. We're looking at one thing, which is this particular IP and everything that touches it. So it's almost the adverse of it. But no question, it's going to take huge amounts of power to process all of this. If we started to say, all this other stuff can touch these applications of this platform. Hopefully I answered your question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Pete Luday, Mission Rock Digital. You did a good job at explaining the use cases surrounding kind of traditional transactional, both for currency and for IP licensing. But I've seen recently a lot of interest in using blockchain tokens for microtransactions, such as rendering. And I wonder if you had any comments on the viability of models here. And just to be clear, what that means is that you could use blockchains to leverage underutilized resources. So for instance, if I'm a graphic artist that has a couple of high-end workstations of powerful GPUs that are not being used, I could rent those out to a render farm using compensation through blockchains. And there's a render tokens is one example that launched last month. There's 2 others in Europe. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually see 2 great applications of this. And again, that's why I'm here to get all these different thoughts, and this is awesome so we can, again, start laying the standards for this. I see 2 parts of that. So one, think of a studio that has access to all these content, right? And say you want to, and someone has a great saying that they have in a film, right? A great tagline. And the studio wants to be able to license that out. You want to be able to give, individuals the right to buy that tagline, like I'll be back or whatever, and get paid for it. You tie it with the blockchain to that, so you can have that microtransaction, because maybe that's 1 cent, so you can put it on your phone or something. But the other point of it, again, I think blockchain would be able to tie that IP, if you're rendering out your computers, to identify, all right, I want to render this out. It's based on this intellectual property, and therefore I'm going to pay this individual to use his computer to composite or something else. So again, I think it depends how you do it. I try to stay away from the currency portion of blockchain, more tied to, I try to tie it to the IP and ownership and everyone that touches that, and that is owed residuals on it. So maybe that the individuals, you'll say, hey, let me use your computer to render, this particular scene, and as I get paid down the line, I'll give you a percentage of that. So some of that is opportunities or new ways to generate revenue, perhaps, for folks that have a bunch of computers sitting around, you need to render it, and a poor producer that has no money up beginning has a way to compensate people down the line with something that's viable, that has that everyone can look at and know that someone watched it.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Jobin, CBC. On the distribution side, I see, as we can track with blockchain, every single transaction, and I wonder if you see it as a way to disrupt or break the regional barriers, because as a Canadian, I cannot benefit from American contents and such. But now, if you can track any transaction, there's no way, there's no reason for the content providers not to actually sell me that content, because they can track it precisely and benefit from all the transactions in the world, basically. So do you see that as a disruptor?
I mean, I share your pain, because my wife's Italian, so we go over to Italy, and I miss particular content on Netflix here that I can't get there, and it's so frustrating, because they're really smart and they can figure out when I'm using a VPN that's looking, but not that I ever do that. But yes, but here's the challenge, right? We've been doing the exact same business here in Hollywood for 100 years, right? So this is the opportunity to look at the business differently. To say to a studio, look, I understand you have a distributor in this particular country that pays you a lot of money for this content. Maybe this is a different way of compensating them. Let's look at this different. I have a way of absolutely tracking who watches what, which is a little challenge, but again, the way we do our business here, sometimes you let them steal a little bit of money because they've been doing good the other way. So there could be pushback because it's a different business model. But again, that's why we're here to talk about this, to open these new business models.
Okay, so my question is on scale. So we're heading towards an Ethereum fork where it's supposed to increase its efficiency. A problem for the last couple of years has just been the number of transactions that the blockchain system can handle. What do you think it's going to take, and when do you think it'll be possible for a Visa scale of blockchain transactions to occur so this can actually become practical for VOD blockchain distribution?
I think it depends, how we structure this. And I think the ETC would be a great place to play with this. Here's an example. The processing power is not an issue. And again, I think like a hacker, not that I'm a hacker, but you look at the DDoS attacks that occurred, they use IoT devices, you got billions of processors out there, in essence. So the processing is not the challenge. It really depends on how we choose to implement blockchain. So I think we're out of time, folks.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, sir.
I did want to clarify one technical point. When we were talking about how much power it takes to run blockchain, one of the things about cryptocurrency specifically with regard to the complexity, the reason it takes so much processing power is because there's a disincentive to participate. So there's like a little, an incentive and a disincentive. There's a little piece that the people that are creating the coins get from the transactions, which is tied to the amount of participation. So the longer it goes on, the smaller that piece is, and the harder it is to create that little reward. So currency is a little bit different than what it would be if we were talking about content, because we can create the keys without that artificial delay. So the overhead in a currency economy is different than the overhead it would be in media content. So I just wanted to clarify that point, because I think people have this idea that blockchain takes a ridiculous amount of processing power. The processing power is here. You use a lot more processing power just by creating a frame of media content than you do for the blockchain tokens, if you want to think of it that way. So, yep.
Thanks so much.
Thank you again.
Okay.